Hello and welcome to this installment of Vox Machina. As your narrator, I'll be bringing fantastic works of fiction from the page to your eardrums. Uploads will be posted weekly, so be sure to subscribe and hit the alerts bell to be notified when new installments are available. Got a story you think deserves the Vox Machina treatment? Let me know in a comment and you might just hear it in a future episode. Thanks for listening and on with the show. In Bad Faith by Fencer X. Episode 4. For the next week, Harry drowned himself in work. He'd never thought the day would come when he would need a distraction from Draco Malfoy. Well, arguably that day had already come some time back in 6th year, but that was neither here nor there. But here he was, diving enthusiastically into his latest assignment that involved the Office of Misinformation. He'd initially been tasked with shadowing a more senior department member while they liaised with the Gringotts goblins, but then it had been discovered he was no longer allowed on the premises, so there'd been some personnel shuffling, and now he was transcribing a witch's phone call with a Muggle newspaper editor, where she was posing as an Environment and Forestry Directorate agent, trying to convince the man that his scoop reporter had not had a genuine sighting of the Kelpie that called Loch Ness its home, but had only mistaken a log and old fishing tackle for something more fantastic. He worked overtime, took on extra projects, and kept himself as busy as possible. So busy he wouldn't have time to wonder if the Ministry Archives would have any information on Maledicti or if the Being Division had any tips on dispelling hag curses. He came home so late most evenings it was nearly the next day already and face-planted onto his bed, passing out until his wand buzzed insistently to wake him for the next day of work, where he would rinse and repeat. It was during one of these brief respites between the end of one workday and the start of another, though, that Harry was rudely jostled from his slumber. He'd been dreaming he was being chased by a snow-white peacock intent on eating his shoelaces because it thought they were worms, and when Harry had taken refuge atop a large boulder, the peacock had transformed into a massive white dragon and threatened to eat him whole. When the jostling had woken him, Harry had panicked, thinking for a brief moment that the dragon was real and here, but instead he was staring down the long, snout-like nose of old Byrne, who was shaking Harry roughly and rasping, "Wake up, oaf! Wake yourself, now!" What the hell? He laid a hand against old Byrne's chest, shoving him away. "Old Byrne, what the hell are you doing here? What time is it?" "The hour is not mattering. The oaf must come attend the master immediately. Up, up!" "What?" Harry muttered, reaching to draw the coverlet back over his shoulder. Did he get eaten by one of the pit demons? God, I hope so. He closed his eyes and snuggled back into his pillow, getting comfortable. Old Byrne only ripped the coverlet from his bed entirely, snapping his fingers and disintegrating the material. "The master is having a fit," he said, expression grim, and Harry sat up straight, irritation at the loss of his bedding momentarily tamped down. "What is he?" But he made himself take a beat and a breath. This wasn't his concern, and touching though old Byrne's worry was, Harry didn't see what that had to do with him. "Malfoy will be fine. You said yourself he has them all the time, and he's gonna have more, so he might as well get used to them. He doesn't want your help, and he sure as shit doesn't want mine. So I'm sorry if his condition is worrying you, but I'd wager this isn't the first Malfoy you've seen in this state." Old Byrne's lined face tightened. "The master is proud, as all of his ancestors have been, and old Byrne has watched 3 of his predecessors succumb to this curse. But the master is also frightened. He is not showing it to anyone, not even old Byrne. But ourselves see things, know things. The master will not survive this curse. He is proud and he is smart, but he is not strong. Not strong enough for this. The oaf is not proud or smart, but he is strong, old Byrne thinks. He is being a good match for the master." "Well, I appreciate the backhanded compliment, I think, but this still isn't any of my business." Old Byrne reached for Harry's hand, covering it with his own. "Please, Harry Potter. He is scared, and he is just not wanting anyone to know it." Well, fuck. Harry wiped a hand over his face, groping with the other for his glasses on the nightstand. Fine. I don't know what you honestly expect me to do, but I guess I can... I don't know. I'll think of some... Old Byrne grabbed his arm, drew him close, and then they were turning into nothing, essence twisting down into a single, infinitely small point before popping back into existence at the foot of the grand staircase. Harry took a nasty stumble, nearly dropping square onto his arse. What? Oi! I haven't even gotten dressed yet! Harry gestured to his semi-nude body and the tatty boxers he was wearing, a pair he'd owned since third year, when he'd received them as a gift from Mrs. Weasley after his last set had disintegrated in her wash. Take me back! After the bog-standard oaf has calmed the master down from his fit, Old Byrne said, and began to tug Harry toward the staircase. But, hey, what happened to Harry Potter? Perhaps when the bog-standard oaf stops behaving like a bog-standard oaf, we will see. A familiar keening wail rent the night air, and Old Byrne paused, listening. It is being a bad one this evening. Is it ever a good one? Harry asked, not really expecting an answer, and shook off Old Byrne as he took the stairs 2 at a time, jogging down the long hallway of the West Wing to the suite that lay at the end. He didn't bother to knock. Malfoy was not going to be in any fit state to answer, and even if he'd been able to refuse Harry entry, Harry likely would have ignored him anyway. To Harry's mild relief, the transformation was in its final throes when he stepped inside, so he did not have to see Malfoy horrifically contorted at unnatural angles or the veins of feathers shooting up through his skin like pea plants. Instead, he was nearly all peacock now, and in the few moments it took Harry to make his decision and stride over to scoop the bird up into his arms, the transformation had completed, and the peacock's head hung limp, its body trembling and tail feathers shivering with soft susurrations. He carefully oriented the peacock correctly so Malfoy didn't wake with a crick in his neck and settled onto the mattress, stroking its back until the frantic thrumming of its heartbeat subsided to something more reasonable. Its claws had something fierce, digging into the meat of his bare legs, but he let it stay there, perched on his lap, a warm and comfortable weight. So, how long has this been going on exactly? Harry asked Old Byrne, who was presently standing at the entrance to the room, wringing his gnarled hands before him. Too long. It is happening more and more frequently as the anniversary approaches. That wasn't exactly what Harry had been asking. It couldn't have been happening at Hogwarts. Word would definitely have gotten around. Since 7th year, then, or thereabouts? Maybe it was tied to coming of age as a wizard. That meant it could have started as recently as, 3 years ago? This sad bastard had been dealing with excruciating, increasingly frequent transformations for 3 whole years? Harry settled back against the pillows, absently stroking the peacock from its crest down its long serpentine neck. By morning, Malfoy would be back to rights, but the respite would be far too brief. The change would take him again and again and again, until one day it held him and never let go. He is scared, Old Byrne had said, and Harry had seen before how foolish Draco Malfoy could be when he was terrified and didn't see a way out for himself. Demonic pacts might only be the beginning. Harry didn't know how he could help, only that he really kind of wanted to, despite Malfoy's protestations. The git couldn't make his amends, after all, strutting about covered in feathers without the sense God gave a goose. He held the peacock close, soaking in its bodily warmth, and told Old Byrne, Next time you see a fit coming on, you come get me immediately, all right? Doesn't matter what time of day or where I am. I'll make excuses if I have to. Old Byrne said nothing, only bowed his head deeply, and that seemed to be all that was said about that. And it did happen again, several more times over the subsequent few weeks. Usually the fits came in the middle of the night, presumably brought on by bad dreams, but once Old Byrne had popped in right as Harry had been about to go on stage to give his speech at the second annual Battle of Hogwarts Remembrance Banquet. He'd begged a very confused Hermione to deliver his marks in his stead, and then found the peacock passed out amidst a battlefield of broken glassware and art pieces in a room Old Byrne said had once been the drawing room. By the third instance, Harry had learned to keep at hand a go-bag of dried crickets and grubs and feed grain, and even a few canisters of owl pellets to see if the peacock fancied them, as the ordeal of the transformation always left the creature exhausted. He was distressed to find he knew a lot more about peacock biology now than he had 3 weeks ago, but such was his very strange life, he supposed. Not wanting to endure a repeat of their first post-transformation encounter, though, Harry always ensured he was gone before Malfoy woke the next morning. Being so sapped by the ordeal, Malfoy typically slept in, and old Burn was good about helping Harry extricate himself from the clinging limbs that always wound up encircling Harry when Malfoy eventually shifted back to his human form. He didn't want to be intimately familiar with the birthmark shaped like Italy on Malfoy's right buttock, but this too was evidently now part of his very strange life. But each time he stumbled back to number 12 after another long night spent putting Malfoy back together from the pieces the transformation shattered him into, left Harry feeling drained. The thought of all this pain, for absolutely no good reason, rankled fiercely. He understood Malfoy had pride. He understood he was terrified and feeling at the end of his rope, with the 2nd of June approaching all too quickly. But clearly he didn't want to die, and this would be, as Harry understood it, a death in most every sense of the word. So Harry decided he needed to be the bigger man, needed to be fucking enormous, really, and do a little digging on his own, since Malfoy seemed to think if the cure to his curse didn't exist in the manor libraries, then there was no cure. Like he did with any other problem in need of solving, Harry went to Hermione. Now, she was already eyeing him with a bit more curiosity than usual, on account of the banquet dine and dash Harry had pulled, but there was little Hermione liked more than a good puzzle, so she still happily agreed when he invited himself over for tea to pick her brain. So, and this is for an assignment at work, of course. Of course, Hermione said, taking a diplomatic sip of her tea, and Harry sensed she didn't believe a word he was saying. So that means you can't go telling anyone else about the stuff we're discussing, all right? It's a need-to-know basis kind of thing. Can I tell Ron? No, of course. Well, I mean... Harry began nibbling on a biscuit. It would sound suspicious if he said no, but Ron had enough on his plate with the summer break coming up. The Weezer's shop did booming business once the Hogwarts students were all home from school, and he and George were pulling late nights prepping for the coming onslaught. I guess if you think he needs to know, but otherwise just keep it between us. Hermione nodded. Right, so I'm wondering what you maybe could tell me about pacts and contracts, mostly how to make and break them. She blinked at him, clearly confused. Like, how to get out of a contract you've made with someone? Not so much someone, but maybe something. Something. She shook her head. I'm sorry, I'm really not following, and I think I need more specifics here. Is this a business contract you're trying to get out of? Not me, and no, it's more... He nibbled on his biscuit some more. More along the lines of like a deal with the devil. Hermione's eyes went wide, and she shifted in her chair. A demonic pact, then? Harry nodded, and she released a delirious little huff of excitement. He could see he'd intrigued her, which boded well. She'd be less likely to ask too many questions about the finer details, getting caught up in the academic joy of it all. Well, first off, I'm sure you know the subject area has not exactly been thoroughly explored for obvious reasons. I know, I'm mostly interested in what people might get out of one. Like, why would you tangle with such a creature in the first place? Are they particularly powerful compared to the magic wizards wield? She reached for a biscuit of her own, but rather than eat it, she gesticulated with it. They're particularly powerful full stop, and it's not so much that their power dwarfs our own, it only works differently. A bit like house elf magic, you know? Harry nodded solemnly, like he didn't recognize this was a pointed reminder. She very much remembered Harry being spirited away from just outside the Great Hall by a house elf not a week prior, and was keen for an explanation. They can achieve with relative ease things that even the most skilled human wizard might spend his entire life attempting. Pacts with demons. She winced. Honestly, they're sort of low-hanging fruit. The kind of thing you'd attempt either in an act of desperation or because it seemed the quickest way to get what you wanted. Or possibly a little bit of both, Harry noted. Demons are devious creatures, though, shrewd, cunning, and dangerously intelligent. They'll make a deal with most anyone who petitions them, but those deals always come with caveats and drawbacks, a fine print the petitioner never considered. To my knowledge, most every pact recorded in history ultimately backfired on the petitioner in the end. And since the petitioner's soul is generally the subject of the bargain, she shuddered. I don't even want to imagine what becomes of it. Honestly, it sounds like a fate worse than the kiss. Harry wondered if Malfoy had imagined it. Given the pitiful size of the note pit, Harry doubted he'd done too much research into the finer details of the rescue route he was attempting to take. Say you had a curse on you, a powerful one that no one else seemed able to break. Could you make a pact with a demon and break it that way? Presumably, Hermione said with a shrug. But then, well, you'd be in a pact with a demon. Is that really any better? To some, it might be. Could it break a hag's curse? Now we're on to hag magic. Hermione tapped her chin in thought. It's conceivable. It would depend on the demon and the hag, but probably? I can't be sure. It's never been documented, so it's uncharted territory, I'm afraid. Yeah, I figured. He wrinkled his nose. You don't know any other way someone might break a hag curse, do you? She gave a slow, confused blink. Well, no, not off the top of my head. That would require a fair bit of research. And Harry, are you sure this is for an assignment? Yes, of course it is. You know I'm in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Oh, right, you are, aren't you? She sighed and shook her head. Well, unless you can give me more details, I'm afraid I can't tell you much more than maybe. Hags are a bit like demons. Their contracts and curses are usually pretty solid. They're fey, though, so there's always a chance you might be able to outsmart them, since they've usually got an overinflated sense of self that blinds them to loopholes in their own magic. That was promising, but it sounded like it would take time Malfoy very much did not have, which meant there was really only one other option if he wanted to avoid spending the rest of eternity being a poncy white bird instead of a poncy white wizard. So, bit of a topic shift, but I had a few questions about, wizarding marriages. That is definitely a topic shift, yes. What? She narrowed her gaze. What's brought this on? You're not going to convince me this is for a work assignment, too. He waved her off. Just call it a passing fancy. Marriages are far more than passing fancies, Harry Potter. Her gaze narrowed even more, and it felt like she was trying to peer through him. You aren't seeing anyone, are you? He did not mention the fact that he'd woken up in Draco Malfoy's bed next to a nude Draco Malfoy several times over the past few weeks. There were some things you just didn't bring up with your best friends unless you absolutely had to, and they weren't there. Not yet, at least. I'm not, I promise. This isn't about me, more a thread I'm following. Really, it is just a passing fancy, so humor me? Her lips twisted and she sighed, settling back with arms crossed. All right, what exactly are you curious about concerning wizarding marriages? Mostly how you get married, and then, if you know, how to get out? Hermione laughed, albeit without much mirth behind it. First you want to know how to make and break a demon pact, and now you want to know how to make and break a marriage contract? Are you sure you're not in any trouble, Harry? Like I said, humor me. She nodded, sipping on her tea to give herself time to collect her thoughts. Well, obviously you've seen how you get married as a wizard. He frowned. I have? Well, of course you have. Bill and Fleur's wedding. Oh, but that had been several years past by now. Well, honestly, that didn't seem all that different from Muggle weddings I've been to. Not that I've been to that many Muggle weddings, but I've seen them on television before. Hermione hummed softly. True, on the surface it might seem similar. Ceremonies binding couples together share common traits across all civilizations. But where Muggle marriages are about a binding of lives, wizarding ones are also a binding of magic. Not that you'd know, but the ceremony isn't all that dissimilar to an unbreakable vow. Harry's heart skipped a beat. What, unbreakable? Don't wizards ever get, I don't know, divorced? She scoffed. I said it wasn't dissimilar, doesn't mean it's the same. And of course, they do on occasion get divorced, but that's more of a modern convention, instated in the last 100 years or so. Harry didn't ask what happened to unhappy couples before the last 100 years or so. But it's very old, very powerful magic, and despite how commonly such ceremonies are performed, it's woefully misunderstood. Of course, we know the nature of the magic involved, how to perform the rituals and all, but who invented the spells, where the idea to create such magical bonds came from, and if we can extend them to other relationships, like families or even enemies, These are all the subject of intense research and debate. Enemies? Why would enemies get married? Harry asked, for no reason whatsoever. Not married. Pay attention, Harry. I'm saying wizarding marriages are as much about love as about a magical bond between two people. If that bond and its magical effects could be expanded to other relationships, like enemies, then there might be all sorts of ways to capitalize on it. Marriage contracts for wizards are unlike any others we have in our society today. Really, a well-worded wizarding marriage contract and a poorly worded demonic one could technically get someone out of a pact with a demon. And I'm actually certain I read mention somewhere that some historians hypothesized that the reason Dumbledore waited so long to face Grindelwald involved a magical pact that prevented him from doing so. Harry had never been less interested in Dumbledore's relationship with Grindelwald. He had his own, formerly dark wizard to worry about. Right, so these marriage pacts, they can be undone, right? Divorce is a thing now. Hermione's nod was ambivalent, which did not instill Harry with a great deal of confidence. Yes, there are ways to dissolve the contract. Legally, of course, it's an easy matter, while the magical bond takes a bit more doing to mitigate. Yeah, sure, but it's possible, right? Like, say, two people decided on a whim to get hitched. Gosh, I don't think anything about the wizarding wedding ceremony lends itself to being performed on a whim. Yeah, but hypothetically, he didn't need the details. They were on a timer here. He just needed to know that if he did this, not that he was doing this, then it wouldn't have to be a permanent thing. Hypothetically, if they got married and then realized they'd made a mistake, how long would they have to divorce? Divorce or get an annulment? Pretend I don't know what an annulment is. She gave him a funny look, which she was welcome to. Harry knew he wasn't exactly being all that subtle with his questions. He just needed answers, and he needed them promptly, because it would probably take between now and June to convince Malfoy this wasn't the worst idea in the history of magic. Well, British wizarding law allows a marriage to be annulled within a year of the ceremony, but she raised a finger. Of course, your marriage would have to qualify as voidable, otherwise you'd be looking at divorce. What are the qualifications? Oh, there's a whole list. I'm sure I couldn't name them all off the top of my head. Generally, issues that relate to whether or not the ceremony was allowed or if both parties were capable of consenting. Harry thought on this. What if one party were under duress? Would that count as not being able to consent? I'm quite sure that's one of the legal definitions of not being able to consent, so of course. Harry leapt to his feet, pumping the air with a fist. Excellent! You've been a great help, more than you realize, actually, but I've got... one more thing. Hermione gaped up at him in shocked silence, so he took his chance. You said the wedding ceremony wouldn't generally be performed on a whim, but how quickly could it be performed? You know, if time were of the essence. I'm not quite... I suppose, with an officiate present and all party members prepared on what to expect, you could complete the ceremony itself inside of perhaps a couple of hours? That sounded perfect to Harry, and he nicked a few more biscuits from the tray. You're a gem, Hermione. I've really got to run now, though. Something urgent's just come up at work, but we will definitely catch up next time, yeah? You and Ron can come round for dinner sometime next week or something. Creature's got a souffle he's been banging on about wanting to serve up. I really wouldn't want to, but Harry didn't catch the rest as he disapparated with a bright pop. The thing was, there was really only one way out of this curse business for Malfoy now. Maybe if he'd brought the matter up sooner, perhaps approached the Ministry for help, or even asked Professor McGonagall for advice, they could have been working on breaking the curse itself, before birthdays and weddings even entered the picture. But for whatever ridiculous reason, Malfoy had tried to go about this on his own, so here they were, staring down the rapidly approaching 2nd of June, with the only thing standing between Malfoy and a feathery forever being someone willing to marry him promptly, with no questions asked. And since Harry hadn't saved anyone in a while, it stood to reason that that someone should be him. Really, it wasn't as if this would be forever. He thought of it as a simple ritual that would stave off the effects of the curse long enough for someone, probably Hermione, to figure out a way around the curse. If they did it inside of a year, then they wouldn't even have to go through the mess of red tape that came with seeking a divorce. Had to get married to him because it was either that or turn into a peacock. Certainly sounded to Harry like grounds for an annulment, and he was sure the Ministry would see it similarly. If everything went well, they'd be done with this business by Harry's birthday. The only flaw with this plan was that Malfoy had to agree to it. The way I see it, Harry opened, because Malfoy was reasonably clever and would surely respond most positively to logic. "You've got to marry someone, right? That's all. Just marry them. You don't have to be in love with them. You don't have to sleep with them, thank God. You just have to go through the whole ceremony, pop the ring on your fingers, and everything's aces, yeah?" Malfoy only blinked at him, an understandable reaction, as Harry had only moments ago stormed the manor, banishing Oldburn to a closet, because he really didn't need any interruptions of "the bog-standard oaf is not making a proper appointment to speak with the master today," and depositing himself squarely in Malfoy's field of view. He had found Malfoy in the parlour this time, curled up on a settee with a hand-knit blanket thrown over him for warmth against the dogged spring chill. There was a mountain of thick tomes stacked precariously on a side table next to him, suggesting that he was, as usual, reading for business and not pleasure. "Oldburn!" Malfoy bellowed, and Oldburn appeared with a pop, bowing obsequiously. "How did this one get in? No, I don't care. Only see him out for me." But Harry brandished his wand in threat when Oldburn turned to him with a glint in his eye. "Touch me, and I'll turn you into a teacup." He addressed Malfoy again, speaking with a more rapid tempo now, in case Oldburn decided life as a teacup might not be so terrible. "And seeing as I know all about your predicament already, we can skip straight to the ceremony. Hermione says it shouldn't take more than a couple of hours, and then it's just a matter of making it past your birthday. Once that's settled, we can get an annulment and go back to pretending we don't know each other." "Forget it, Oldburn. I'll handle him myself." Malfoy reached for his wand, resting this time on a stand next to the worrisomely wobbly tower of books. "And I've checked. I'm pretty sure this sort of thing is illegal. Between blokes, I mean. I'm like 95% certain that Collins in the Portkey office and Collins in the Office of Misinformation are husbands and not brothers, or else they were doing something really inappropriate for siblings to get up to at the last inner-office amity event." Malfoy stood, doffing the blanket to reveal he was once more clad in a thin, faded robe and little else, and took a threatening step forward, and Harry hastily averted his eyes. "So this strikes me as the quickest and easiest way to get around the curse. You could be a free man again inside of a few months, and all you'd need to sacrifice is a few weeks hitched to me." Malfoy was smacking his wand against his palm now, and seemed to be deciding which curse to fling at Harry, or perhaps thinking of summoning another paperweight from his study. "Also, to be clear, this would only be a business arrangement. I'm sure you're going to make someone very miserable someday, and I wouldn't want to stand in the way of that, but this way we just sign a couple of documents, exchange some rings, and then poof, no more curse. And I've got enough friends at the ministry who owe me favours by now that I can make sure no one ever has to know this happened. You can imagine I want people knowing I'm married to you about as much as you likely want people knowing you're married to me." Malfoy arched a lacy white brow. "You don't want people knowing you're married to me?" The words dripped with saccharine innocence, but Malfoy's dark expression betrayed the inherent venom. Listen, it's not a slight, so stop acting like it'd just be a whole thing, and you damn well know it. So since I'm sure you don't want reporters banging on your door at all hours of the day and night, I thought we'd try and keep this between us. Except it won't be between us." "What?" Malfoy, actually addressing him in a somewhat civil tone, had not factored into Harry's calculations, and he'd lost his train of thought. "What? It won't be between us. It will be between you, me, and the officiate, and the license office, and any witnesses." Oh, so now he was going to just be difficult because he could. "Listen, all right, it's not without its flaws, but it's at least a plan, and if—" "No, it's not a plan. It's suicide, because, and let me be crystal clear, I will kill myself before I marry you, full stop." "Then I'd start saying my goodbyes if I were you, because if you don't marry me, the one person in the world actually offering, I'll remind you, then you're going to turn into a peacock forever. Then I'll be a fucking peacock forever." He stabbed Harry in the chest with the tip of his wand, pressing forward with uncomfortable force. "Don't think I haven't noticed you slipping through my wards, playing nanny while I lose myself to this god's-forsaken curse. Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel righteous? Turning the other cheek so far you're liable to pop your head off? Do you sleep just a little bit better at night, knowing you've given me comfort at my lowest point? I'd have thought you'd be too busy with all your do-gooding these days to spare a thought for me, but I guess nothing gets your rocks off quite like getting one over on Draco Malfoy, eh?" Oldburn cleared his throat. "Oldburn will say that the bog-standard oaf is Fuck off, Oldburn. I mean to make this mine and Potter's final conversation one way or another." Harry didn't dare take his eyes off Malfoy, but in his peripheral vision he could see Oldburn sweep another low bow and disappear with a pop. Malfoy leaned in close, nose nearly brushing Harry's. "In 1 month's time, I will meet my fate alone, And when that transformation takes me for the last time, know that it will be with thoughts of you, not being able to save me, dancing in my mind that I go to that final great unknown. Harry thinned his lips into a tight line. You'll give in to the curse just to spite me. If I weren't set up so comfortably already, I'd take up proper residence in that rent-free space I apparently occupy in your head. With a muttered flippendo, he sent Malfoy reeling back against the settee, straightening his robes and dusting himself off. You're a real piece of work, you know that? Flattery? I'm charmed. You really must want to marry me, then. I've known you since you were 11 years old, nearly a decade, and in all that time, not once have I ever seen you be brave. Not for bravery's sake, at least. You choose the path of least resistance every single time. Whatever route will get you to where you want to go with the least amount of sacrifice. And I always found it odd that someone who seemed to care so much about what others thought of him would show himself to be such a coward, publicly even. Like, you'd think you'd have at least figured out a way to get what you wanted, how you wanted it, without being an obvious little tit. But then again, you weren't sorted Ravenclaw, were you? So, anytime you're faced with a problem that asks an ounce of bravery from you, asks you to stand up, show some spine, and take a chance, you shrink back and you lash out and you push away everyone who wants to help, whether they be a dickhead you knew in school or an unaccountably loyal house elf. Because you don't mind people thinking you're an asshole. You don't mind them thinking you're lazy. You mind them thinking you're scared, that you're a human man with human foibles who's not untouchable. He's just fucking terrified like the rest of us. He leaned over Malfoy, who seemed to be vibrating out of his skin with pure, unadulterated rage, and Harry knew he was this close to combusting in a cloud of feathers. Good. You're right. I do have do-gooding I ought to be attending to, but I'm here, with you, offering this, because I know what it feels like to be terrified of dying, and to not want anyone else to know it. Just like I know that even the tiniest of comforts in moments like that mean the world. He drew back. I won't tell your secret if you won't tell mine. Malfoy was breathing rapidly now, flushed with anger. There were little pink dots in his cheeks and spreading over his chest. Or maybe that was the pimpling rash preceding what was bound to be a spectacularly horrific transformation. You know nothing about me. I know enough. I know that in 18 days' time, your bones will crack and your skin will explode, and you'll spend your final sentient moments in abject agony. The same agony I've watched you endure night after night after night, and then you'll be gone. And I'll go close up the note pit and head back to work. And who knows, maybe I'll adopt you once it's all done. Keep you in the front garden at Grimmauld Place. It's brimming with bugs and beetles and all sorts of creepy crawlies. You'll love it. And every morning, I'll step outside and dump my compost in the heap so the worms will come up for a root around, since I'm sure those will be your favourites. People will ask what my pet peacock's name is, and I'll tell them it's something like Larry or Ed, and they'll laugh, because what a silly name for such a magnificent creature. Don't worry, though. When it's just us, I'll still call you Malfoy. But you won't know, because you'll be a fucking peacock. Forever. He then held out his hand. Or you can be married to me for 1 month, and then we can forget we ever knew each other. Malfoy recoiled, regarding the hand as one might a tumorous growth, so Harry waggled his fingers invitingly. Come on, make me the most miserable man on the planet. Malfoy still balked, a dozen different emotions flitting across his features, and Harry suspected a not insignificant part of Malfoy genuinely wanted to wondrously explode Harry, or at least send another paperweight flying into his forehead. At long length, though, he seemed to come to the conclusion that he really would rather not die after all, and he spat out a gruff, "Fine," before crossing his arms very deliberately, leaving Harry's hand hanging in the air. Well, it would have to be good enough, he supposed. And then Harry realized he had an entirely new problem. He needed to find someone who could marry them.